We want to bring in our next guest here as we continue talking about the latest developments. Dr. Alex Del Carmen, who is a criminologist. He joins us live right now. Thank you so much for coming on this afternoon. And I know you were watching with us that news conference. What were the things that stood out to you the most?
Well, thanks for having me, Lexi. I think, first of all, what we heard is that the information is very fluid. Right now, we don't know what we don't know. And that's typical in these kinds of cases, right? You see that, things are happening right away. Information is still coming in to police headquarters. There's a lot of video, audio, witnesses to talk to. So I expect that there will be periodic updates. And I also expect that those updates are going to have a lot more information and perhaps at times even contradictory from what we've been told just a few minutes ago.
And we heard police say there one person killed, between 10 to 15 injured. And I think some people might wonder, how do they not know the number of victims? How would you describe what they have to do in this investigation to determine that?
So the first thing that law enforcement does when something like this happens is to neutralize the source of the threat, right? In this case, it appears that they made an arrest or two. So that would be the first thing, right, to contain the threat. The second thing that happens is that you try to go to the victims and try to call EMS, as it appears that they did. Luckily for the people that were there, ambulances were already on site and law enforcement was already on site. So that must have helped a great deal and likely prevented other people from getting hurt and perhaps even getting killed. And then thirdly, they're going to process the crime scene like everything that we do in the law enforcement industry. And it's likely going to take days, perhaps even weeks, to figure out exactly what the motive was, what was behind all this. There's going to be forensic analysis of computers and cell phones, and to try to figure out if this was part of a bigger event or if it was simply, several people having arguments and they happen to be carry guns, and then, it goes off from there.
And of course, we've also been seeing all of this video that has been pouring in, and many of our viewers, we're seeing a lot more of them join us now as we continue following this very developing story here. But many of them were with us too when we pulled up this video that first showed that moment of panic when we saw officers rushing towards Union Station. I want to play that out for some of our viewers here now, showing the response to this. Take a look in the back of your screen here. Officers rushing into Union Station as the first reports of shots fired rang out. So we saw this, and then we also heard at the news conference that there could have been potentially someone who was at the parade that possibly may have tackled one of the two people that they took into custody. And so I want to ask you too, just the significance of video, the amount of media members who are at this celebration that could potentially have a lot of key pieces of evidence.
There's no question, right? This reminds me a lot of the Boston Marathon shootings that took place some years back, in the sense that, everyone's got a camera. It's likely being televised live, as you guys were showing it. And there are going to be some different angles of exactly what happened. But clearly what you see here and the video that you're showing clearly shows that law enforcement, were called to the scene, and it wasn't just, multiple entities that showed up. It was everyone that could actually, show up to that building inside, this particular entity. And you see uniform officers, you see individuals that are also in plain clothes, which likely shows that there were undercover officers that were there. So, this was a massive response, right? It's very likely that the threat was contained within minutes of this happening. And I'm not surprised that citizens were also involved. It typically does happen where you have somebody that was either former military or former law enforcement that was on the scene that decided to simply respond to the threat right away.
Sure, and we also heard them say over 800 law enforcement members helped in taking care of security and making sure that things were safe at the celebration today. I want to bring in also right now my colleague Andy Mack, who's been joining us for more of this coverage. Andy, what were your biggest takeaways and what questions do you still have?
I think it's kind of interesting, Alex, you bring up the Boston Marathon bombing, and certainly that was a very disturbing event, obviously domestic terrorism, and obviously we're still gathering information on this. Only one person dead in this incident according to police. So hopefully the links there end between these two incidents, between Boston Marathon and this Kansas City Super Bowl parade. We were talking, me and you, on Super Bowl Sunday about just the amount of security in place for Super Bowl. DHS Secretary Mayorkas on hand in Las Vegas, Nevada for that. Just talking about the national security aspect of it. But this is very similar. Last year there were 1 million people attending a parade like this in Kansas City. So they're very familiar with it, but also managing so many people about that. Just break it down for me a little bit. In comparison to the Super Bowl, there are going to be 1 million people potentially in Kansas City for this. Maybe how much heightened security is there and how much preparation is in place? Because unlike the Super Bowl, which we know happens months in advance, this just came together in several days. Talk a little about the security and that aspect of it going into today.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned our conversation just a few days ago, Andy, because I was thinking the same thing when I saw this live, that you and I were talking about the security at the Super Bowl, and I was making the prediction that things were going to go very well because of the amount of security that actually took place and was in place at the time. This is different, right? So imagine that this is more localized as an event, even though you do have the help of sister and brother, cities that are close by to Kansas City that are going to be helping out with manpower, and they're likely going to have had some ambulances on site. Kansas City is big enough, and the police department is strong enough to be able to supply its own security for an event like this, although it is likely that they had other entities like state troopers and whatnot involved. But it doesn't have the security protocol that the Super Bowl would have, right? Because it is not a national security event. You don't have the benefit of the millions of dollars that go into the security component of the Super Bowl. That's not to say, however, that this was not secure enough. And I want to make that clear, right? Anytime you have 1 million people in one setting, law enforcement understands that they're going to have to do social media sweeps, that they're going to have to do some of the very similar tactics and techniques that they employed this past Sunday.
Yeah, and some of the images you're watching right now, obviously viewer discretion is advised because it's very tough to watch. For some of this, as like you mentioned, other incidents in the past that kind of bring you back to other moments, some disturbing ones. And I appreciate you bringing up our conversation because I think I also took a lot of what we were talking about on Sunday into today when I saw this happen. And obviously I was watching the parade, watching Patrick Mahomes speak, watching Travis Kelce speak at the podium there to so many people, so many adoring fans, and then a little bit of chaos ensues as well. We saw the mayor talk about how he was in attendance and he was actually running to safety himself. The governor of Missouri saying that as it's on the border there between Kansas City and Missouri as well. And I asked several other experts earlier about magnetometers and maybe other protocols that could have been in place. You mentioned maybe prevention tactics, and you can only be so safe if you put all these measures in place. Is there more that potentially an incident like this will lead to other events in the future having even more safety protocols in place?
Yeah, I am absolutely certain that there will be many conversations in the law enforcement community post this event as to what could have been done in order to prevent something like this happening. I've been a criminologist, as you know, for 27 years. And this is my field of work, and I can tell you that it's almost impossible to prevent, something like this happening when you have 1 million people next to each other, lots of emotions, perhaps even some alcohol involved, and also we have foreign actors that don't like us, right? So I cannot exclude that until the FBI does. And so I will say to you that it's an impossibility to achieve security 100% of the time, but I am fairly certain that law enforcement will have serious conversations going into next year to ensure that wherever this happens again, in terms of what parade, what city will be celebrating a Super Bowl win, will be fortified, and some of these issues will be addressed. But look, from what I can see, the law enforcement presence was heavy. The visual effects of having eyes and ears on the ground was there. They had undercover officers. They were doing all the right things. And so this is probably not the time to second guess that, but rather to try to learn what the motive was and if this was something part of something bigger, or perhaps just people arguing and it got out of hand.
Yeah, all very good points here. And I want to go back to just that initial information that police have been able to confirm. 2 people in custody, 10 to 15 injured, no children or law enforcement believed to be among the victims, and one person killed in this. And so knowing what we know right now, I want to ask you too, because every time there's a tragic situation like this that unfolds, everyone is like, why? Why did this happen? What could the motive be? This is supposed to be a great celebration day for the city of Kansas City, and here we are talking about a deadly event that happened. And so when they look at the motive here, knowing that there's 2 people, how does that play a role in the investigation?
Well, it plays a significant role because when you have two people, it either means that you have a couple of individuals that are highly skilled that showed up to shoot and kill people, or you simply have the likelihood that it was an argument that took place between two individuals that happened to be armed towards the end of the event. And then, innocent people were bystanders that simply got shot and in some cases killed. Again, we don't know what we don't know, but what I can tell you though is anytime you have two individuals, law enforcement begins to look at it from both the domestic and the foreign type of threat. And once again, there will be more information coming out likely today, if not tomorrow, that will either, the FBI will likely come out and say, look, this was not a terrorist attack, or this was a domestic terrorist attack, and then they'll go from there. But that's the first determinant about, what took place. And then the second question to answer, as you noted, Lexi, was, why were people, involved in this, and why would people harm each other on such a great day to celebrate, what was a great Super Bowl game? And that's the story of us criminologists and why we study what we study, which is to try to explain the why and sometimes try to use rational responses to irrational behavior.
That is a very good way to put it in there, and obviously motives, they're looking into it right now. Is they didn't really give a ton of information about that, but those two armed individuals, and sometimes your kind of mind goes to the worst, but it potentially could just be an argument between two individuals that were also carrying weapons. I do want to ask you, because obviously we're learning one person has died, a very tragic day, and of course no victims appear to be children or law enforcement. There are potentially 10 to 15 victims, shooting victims with gunshot wounds potentially. We thought potentially those victims could also be just around the chaos of stampede of people trying to get out, trying to flee to safety. Maybe are we surprised that more people weren't injured in that regard? Obviously you don't want people injured, but just around the chaos, is that something that we typically see people potentially get injured just around the periphery of an incident like this?
Definitely. And I will tell you, Andy, that one of the things that we see often too is that not only are people intentionally injured as a result of whatever, the bad guys are doing, but then the others that are fleeing from the scene. I mean, people do irrational things when they're running away from danger, right? And sometimes they're jumping other people. Sometimes you have individuals that are handicapped that cannot move as quickly. And so all of those things take effect. But I also want to underscore the importance of the mental aspect of this, right? There are going to be folks that were part of this, that witnessed some of these things, that are going to be scarred for life. And that's something that we seldom talk about. But, there are going to be a lot of folks that are going to carry this the rest of their lives. They're going to have nightmares on this. They're going to have, life-changing decisions that they're going to be making sooner or later. And it's really unfortunate that, the scars are perhaps invisible, but the legacy of harm is left among many people that were not even close to the shooters.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of really good points there, and that is so important to talk about too. The people who may have witnessed this, the law enforcement officers who also may have seen that. I mean, you think about everyone who's been impacted, and then you take into account too that today is the anniversary of the Parkland shooting. And I mean, for viewers who have to hear this news, for us reporting on it, it never gets easier. Yet here we are again today talking about another tragic event.
Yeah, and not only that, you also hear people, talk about this for years. And imagine, for instance, if you're, young kids were at the parade and you're a parent and you're working and you're trying to get a hold of them, but the cell phone is not ringing on the other side, or perhaps they're not answering the call because they're seeking, refuge somewhere. Those minutes, those hours that pass before you know that your kids are safe are going to be enduring moments of pain for the rest of your life. Those people that actually, even the children that may have been around that saw these two bad guys, pull out their weapons and shoot, at innocent people. I mean, those scars are there for life. And then on top of that, you also have the physical scars that some people will never report, even those that are close by to the incident that perhaps fell and they just went home and never reported that. So these are tragic moments, right? And unfortunately, these are happening more often than not. And it's really part of our national daily conversation now, it seems. But what is tragic about all of this is the fact that, oftentimes people point fingers and accusing law enforcement of not doing a good job or of not doing, engaging in the security protocol that they should have. And I will say that there are a lot of really good, talented people in the law enforcement community that have worked really, really hard to make sure that these incidents go, without any injuries. And I will bet to guess, without knowing the details of what happened today, that there were heroes out there in the law enforcement community that likely made these arrests and responded to the incident right away, as to the reason as to why Andy was asking earlier, that there are not more injured people and perhaps additional people that may have died.
Yeah, really, that is very true. And I do want to also show viewers, we're getting some news in right now from police here saying that we're expecting yet another update. That's expected at 5 o'clock Central Time, so about 45 minutes from now at the very same place where we got that last update. Dr. Alex Del Carmen, criminologist, joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Thank you so much for your time as we continue to monitor a very active breaking news scene.
Thanks for having me.